Heart-pounding, Rro'katha led Green Rabbit, or Rab, as she preferred to go by, to the gossiping guppy. She glanced at the woman periodically, still on the fence about how much she could rely on her. Atana had given her word, but the human was a little harder to predict. She believed that she wouldn't actively cause her any harm because of how loyal she seemed to be to Atana, but she also couldn't trust she wouldn't just slip away if things went bad. The hours had ticked by in a bizarre blend of agonizing slowness during her time back in the warehouse. The survivors of the initial attack had been ordered to return to base by Atana, given the severity of their wounds. Bones shattered by hammers tended to take longer to heal than just some broken skin. The itching had been a powerful distraction, but Rro'katha had focused through and worked out a plan with her newfound partner in crime. It was a little loose, though. A lot of room for improvisation. Just another reason to keep giving the redhead questioning looks. Eventually, the glances were noticed, and Rab gave Rro'katha a coy smirk.
"What? Is there something on my face? Or is it just pretty to look at?"
she asked, adding a disarming wiggle of her eyebrows.
"Just wondering how long I'm going to see it, I guess."
Rro'katha shrugged. Rab barked out a short laugh.
"Oh, that all depends on if you treat me right," she quipped playfully. "But aye, boss ordered me to do a raid. I'ma do a raid. Pretty much all there is to it."
"Fair enough." Rro'katha nodded back.
"Just not used to relying on someone to actually have my back."
Rab's features softened.
"Oh, geez. You've really had a rough go of it, huh?"
she asked, lowering her voice considerably.
"If it makes you feel any better, I know the feeling. Took me ages to get used to having actual friends when I first joined up with Atana. You get so used to thinking everyone's out to rob you out of your skin that trust becomes a weird fairy tale. Takes a lot of getting used to. Yeah."
Rro'katha huffed a sigh before trailing off. She wanted to reciprocate the genuine statement, but she didn't really have words for it. Thankfully, she was spared by the approach of their destination.
"We're here. I'll give it a quick check before we go in." "Have fun,"
Rab said cheerily, giving Rro'katha a smack on the back.
"Don't worry, I got your back. It's a nice back, too. Remind me to ask you about your workout routine when we're done here, eh?"
Rro'katha felt her cheeks go hot at the compliment, and even if her brain hadn't conversely frozen, any words she might have thought to say choked in her throat. She nodded, hoping she looked confident or authoritative, but she doubted it. The woman's good cheer was disarming and too dangerously close to infectious for her liking. As she skulked away in the shadows, she checked the windows of the bar. With her intimate knowledge of the building, it was easy to know the best ways to look in without being seen. The ground floor was still devoid of anyone that she could see, but the fireplace had been lit. Circling around, it was hard to tell what was dancing firelight and what could be a shadow of someone they had to get past. Not willing to risk the front door, she grit her teeth and went back to Rab.
I can't tell if anyone is upstairs. We'll sneak in through the kitchen entrance around back. Sounds good? You go first. I'll be on your tail. If anyone's home, they'll just think you're there to report. And if not, well, who gives a fuck?"
Rro'katha blinked and nodded again. She was far too outclassed in the wit department for any snappy banter, it seemed. Guiding the way around the building, she slowly turned the handle of the back door. It still rattled and scraped with the corrosion building up from the sea air, but unless the bartender was at his station, she knew no one would hear it. Careful not to knock into any of the boxes or barrels as she crept in, she came around the stove to get to the space behind the bar. The barkeep was not in his usual spot behind the counter, but it was still uncertain if the guppy being closed was a good thing or a bad thing in her mind. With a begrudging growl, she felt her pulse quicken. There were two voices carrying an idle conversation, likely by the fireplace. The caution had been well warranted, but she had been hoping that they could go straight to Grayson. Unsure if Rab could hear them, she turned and held a claw to her lips, then held up 2 fingers before nodding towards the corner with the fireplace. Rab quirked a brow, a hand coming to a rest on the hilt of the sword belted to her hip. There was a question in her eyes, one mirrored by her lips as she mouthed, "How do we do this?" at Rro'katha. Not used to being the one to make calls or give orders, she hesitated again. Her decision didn't take long, though. Whether she succeeded or failed, this was the last night she would be in Jagged Gale. She wouldn't be surprised if someone had died after fighting her, but usually everyone was still breathing when she left. This was Grayson and his cronies, but she couldn't help but let her thoughts drift to Rro'katha. Her brother saw her as a hero, and part of her wanted to live up to that. Getting close, and keeping her voice as low as possible, she whispered to Rab.
"I'll just check in with Grayson, but I'll leave the hidden door open enough for you to find. Maybe if I can convince him things went according to plan, he'll dismiss everyone else."
Rab nodded.
"And if it doesn't, I'm sure a ruckus is gonna go up regardless. If his goons try to creep up on you, I'll stick 'em in the back, and don't worry about me getting outnumbered. This ain't me first tussle."
Standing, Rro'katha came out of the staff area and strode past the 2 men sitting near the fireplace. They initially flinched for weapons when they saw her, but relaxed once they realized who it was. Holding her breath, she clicked the secret button in the knot of the wooden door and slid it open. Striding down the stairs, she tensed as she saw 2 more figures boredly perusing the shelves. Similar to the others, they tensed, then relaxed as she passed. Rro'katha did her best to ignore them as she went to the office at the back and leaned against the doorframe, as she always did. "Job's done," she growled to the stringy little man as he rolled some powdered ushkara herbs into a cigarette. He jumped in surprise and lifted his gaze to her. Red was starting to creep into the whites of his eyes, and judging by the faint aroma hanging in the air, he had already indulged in a few puffs before she arrived. He squinted at her. "Is it? And where are the boys I sent with you?" "Dead," Rro'katha said flatly. "We were outnumbered, and some of the embittered leadership was there." Grayson blinked and set aside his half-finished cigarette. He stood up, his fingers twitchy and shaking, gesticulating in erratic ways at Rro'katha. "Which leadership? Who?" he asked, a bizarre twinkle of delight creeping into his eyes. "Was it their boss? That arrogant lion bitch, is she dead?" Rro'katha tensed a little, hoping his addled brain would assist her just this once. "Yeah, she was there. She was the one that killed the 2 you sent with me, but I managed to get the drop on her." She paused, recalling the fight, then let out a single breath of laughter. "Literally, actually." Grayson blinked at her a few more times, thinking, processing her words. His face scrunched up at her in an ugly way, as if he were contemplating whether or not he believed her, or, given his state, if he even understood her correctly. I'm going to need a body," he murmured, beginning to pace. "No one on the table's gonna believe it if I don't bring him a head." Before his train of thought could go any further, there was a muffled cry from overhead, one of the sentries by the fireplace.
"Someone's here!"
Rab had been seen. Grayson blinked, the color draining from his face. His gaze settled on Rro'katha as the telltale sounds of violence, muffled by stone and floorboard, fell upon them like rainfall through a leaky roof. His eyes studied her for a fraction of a second before the addled haze over his face melted away. In its place was the cold, murderous predator that had paralyzed her so many times in the past. His teeth showed in a feral snarl. "Traitor," he seethed like an angered snake. "You led them right to me!" With Rab already in action and her being surrounded, Rro'katha felt the fear creeping back up her spine. Instead of pleading her case, as she had tried and failed to do so many times in the past, she felt an equally predatory growl. "Are you really that surprised?" Grayson spluttered at her for a moment before scrambling back and swinging his arm wildly. "Don't just stand there, you louts! Kill her!" he shrieked. His two subordinates exchanged a glance before their hands reached for their weapons. In turn, Rro'katha spun to face them and raised her fists. She contemplated using the door as a choke point, but the superior reach afforded by her enemy's weapons killed that plan. She had no weapon, no shield, just her fists, so she had to get in close. Lashing her tail and baring her teeth, Rro'katha surged forward alongside a lion's roar. The first adversary, a human man who seemed to her to be just a few inches too tall and just a little too thin, thrust a sword at her chin as she advanced. She swerved to the side, feeling the cold edge of its steel parting the fabric of her jacket along her side, tickling the fur of her midriff. The man's eyes flew wide, and he ducked back just in time to avoid being clotheslined by Rro'katha's outstretched arm. The second adversary came in from her side, taking advantage of her moment of overextension to swing an old mace at her chest. She folded over it slightly, a flare of pain swelling in her torso. But it didn't do as much damage as it might have to someone with less muscle mass providing natural armor. Turning, she brought the back of her fist against the man's face, cracking something and sending him falling back into one of the shelves. It toppled back with a ponderous groan and a cacophonous crash, the glass jars scattering their frames and contents across the floor like the aftermath of a bad party. Clutching a hand to her chest and sucking in a lungful of air, Rro'katha turned back to her previous foe. He had scrambled back to his feet and raised his sword for her as she turned. She flinched back, the blade almost cleaving into her chin. Too many close calls, her mind provided as she ducked back from another wild swing. Keep one down. Don't let them gang up on you. She heard shifting from behind her, her ears flicking. On instinct, she ducked and rolled to the side, and not a moment too soon. A jar of herbs had been hurled at the back of her head, narrowly missing her as she moved. It didn't hit her sword-wielding opponent, sadly, but it did give her some room to breathe all the same. She turned, swiping wide with her left arm in a clearing sweep to keep them back, while her right hand caught the edge of another shelf. Seeing an opportunity, she pulled, sending it tilting like a felled tree toward her enemy. He threw up his arms to catch it, and to her surprise, managed to keep from being totally crushed. The jars and other small containers falling on and around him would keep him occupied for at least a little bit, though. The thug with the mace charged in again, this time leveling a swing towards her head. She managed to duck it, but one of the ridges clipped her ear as it whistled by. Hearing the creak of wood behind her and the scrape of steel on stone, Rro'katha knew the sword would be biting at her back if she didn't move. From her crouched position, she rushed forward, her arms coiling around the waist of the man like two pythons squeezing the life out of their prey. Lifting him, the Rro'katha kept going until she knew she was out of reach before slamming him down on his back. Rro'katha tried to take the chance to finish him while he was winded, but an angry shout telegraphed an incoming strike from behind. Whirling around, she had just enough time to leap back. It was fast enough, though, as the tip cut a significant gash across her abdomen. He turned the sword into a backhand swing to keep his momentum, but once again her instincts kicked in. She stepped forward, bringing up her forearm to block him at his wrist and pinning him against a shelf. Her other arm came up and slammed into the back of his elbow, a sickening crunch and a scream of pain coming from her assailant. The sword clattered to the ground as he let go, his elbow bent in the exact opposite direction it was supposed to be. Letting him screech in agony, she turned again to the man she had left on the floor. His breath was still a ragged wheeze as his lungs tried to expand, his face a bright red, but he didn't back down. The mace came at her in an upward swing. Thankfully, it was much more sluggish, making it easier to step back and out of the way. Rro'katha's foot came up, solidly connecting with his gut and causing him to crumple in on himself. With another step forward, Rro'katha drove her elbow down on the back of his neck, slamming him to the floor once again, his forehead bouncing off the stone beneath their feet. He lay there a moment, clutching his head, squirming and groaning. With a snort, Rro'katha kicked him in the head, and he stopped groaning. He was still breathing, but at least he wasn't her problem now. Turning back to the man with the broken arm, he was fumbling for his discarded weapon with his offhand when he saw her looking at him. There was a beat before he practically dove for it. His hand fumbled uselessly around the hilt of his sword, and by the time he was able to get a firm grip, Rro'katha was upon him. She put her foot on the back of his neck and pressed him into the floor. "Stay down," she snarled, pressing until he squeaked like a mouse. When he stopped struggling, she took her foot off of him and surveyed the damage. Both down, neither dead, and herself only moderately bruised for her effort. She could still hear the sounds of fighting through the floorboards overhead, indicating that Rap wasn't done yet. Rro'katha momentarily considered heading up to give her some backup, but that impulse died when her eyes fell on Grayson in his office. He had pressed himself against the wall like a frightened baby owl, his eyes wide and face paler than usual. His grease had thickened with a layer of cold sweat. "I am going to need a bath when I am done with him," Rro'katha thought as she advanced toward him. She still had a job to do, after all. "Stay back!" Grayson babbled, reaching for his hip and drawing a dinky little knife that looked about as threatening as a discarded nail. You feral beast! What has gotten into you? I made sure your brother could get his medicine, didn't I? I gave you work, a place in the city where no one else would, and this is how you repay me!" Rro'katha's lips peeled back in a snarl, and the low rumble in her throat growing louder as she advanced and loomed over him. "What's gotten into me? You really think you did me a favor? You lied to me and slipped a leash around my neck. You didn't give me medicine. You blackmailed me with it, held my brother hostage with it. If anyone made me feral, it's you." Grayson jabbed the knife in her general direction, but in his trembling hand, it didn't even reach her. It waggled uselessly in front of her nose like a bothersome gnat, and a proud part of her that she'd rarely had the time to indulge felt annoyed that this trivial creature had ever made her feel fear. With almost casual slowness, she reached up, took his hand in hers, and squeezed until everything popped. Grayson wailed and crumpled to the floor once she released his now thoroughly ruined hand, clutching it against his belly as if that might somehow fix it. The knife clattered to the floor, useless. His eyes, glistening, looked up into Rro'katha's. "Mercy!" he begged. "You've made your point. You're off the hook. Just go. Leave me in peace, for fuck's sake. Take your stupid leaves and go away. Just mercy, please." Rro'katha couldn't help but let out a low, merciless laugh.
You feel that? That's how I'm supposed to make people feel. If I don't do that, I'm not doing my job, right? I would be coddling you. After all, it's up to you to protect your own. What kind of message would it send if I just walked away now? But don't worry. I learned my lesson. Kitty's done bluffing.
Grayson shriveled under her shadow like a dried plum. A tiny whimper and a strangled utterance of "please" being the last coherent thing he ever said. Rro'katha stopped at the base of the stairs, gripping the railing as she stopped to steady her breath. Her hands were coated in blood and shaking as she came to grips with what she had done. It was her first kill. Something she never would have been driven to if she had never met the man that would be her first victim. She was surprised that it still shook her as much as it did. But even more worrying was the gratification it gave her, knowing he was dead and it was her hands that did it. The only thing that mattered was she and her brother were free now. That thought nearly brought her to tears with relief, but she was still a little too charged up to allow herself to. Once she was a bit more steady, she noticed that the sounds of fighting had quit upstairs. Ascending to the main level, she looked about for Rab, hoping she had fared well. The woman was leaned against the bar, a damp cloth soaked in what was probably alcohol pressed against an open gash in her side. 2 bodies were piled up in the corner under a window where they wouldn't be easily seen from outside, and a few bloodstains streaked here and there across the floor. There was also a broken chair, implying some improvisation had taken place. Rab looked up to Rro'katha and nodded.
You all right, brawler?
She asked, wincing and sucking in a sharp breath through tightly clenched teeth when she pulled her improvised swab away.
Fuck. Nah, it's gonna sting tomorrow. I'm all right. Never better, actually,
she said, blood dripping from split knuckles and the 2 gashes in her torso.
You okay?
Rab corked a brow at Rro'katha, then nodded.
Yeah, I'm fine. Took a nick or 2. My biggest injury is probably my pride. One of those dipshits hit me with a chair. A fucking chair! Like, bash. Barroom brawl type crap. The fuck's the dignity in that? Like, here I am, badass vigilante trying to clean up the place, and boom! Nails and wood knocks me on me ass.
Rro'katha chuckled and shook her head.
I don't know. Tends to work well in my favor. I am the brawler to you, right?
Rab rolled her eyes.
Oh, whatever, fair enough,
she grumbled, swabbing her wound a few more times before reaching into her pack and pulling out a roll of bandages. Before she started patching herself up, she grabbed a bottle of ale and tossed it to Rro'katha.
Here, wash the blood off and get out of here. Don't mind the smell. Better people think you're drunk than see you covered in blood. Keep your distance and your head down till nightfall, then head for the docks. I'll regroup with the Tana, and we'll find you when you're ready. If something goes wrong, I'll get you. Mind if I take a few things before you do whatever you're going to do?
Rro'katha asked as she yanked the cork out with her teeth. She began pouring some of the strong brew over her hands, hissing as it got into her knuckles.
Shame to let all of that go to waste downstairs.
Rab shrugged, closing the distance between them with a casual pace.
Normally, I'd say let it all burn. But it's medicine to you and your brother, so fuck it, take as much as you can carry,
she said. She paused by Rro'katha's side and put a hand on her shoulder.
But for real. Seriously. Are you okay? I saw you shaking on the way up.
Rro'katha hung her head and let out a weary sigh.
I don't know,
she admitted.
I've never... He just...
She trailed off, looking again at her hands, now free of blood, but not the scent of it to her nose. Rab looked at Rro'katha's hands, her expression softening. She lifted her own hand, letting it hover close to Rro'katha's in silent question.
I've killed my fair share of people, Brawler. Take it from me, it never gets easy, and it shouldn't. And that's a good thing. The kinds of people who enjoy killing, who aren't bothered when they do it, those are the real monsters of the world. For your sake, I pray you never have to kill again,
she said softly before giving Rro'katha a small smile.
Want a hug?
The simple question snapped the Rythar out of her thoughts enough to make her laugh. Even still, she nodded. Half expecting it to be a joke, her ears rose up as the redhead embraced her, and flattened as she accepted it. Hugging her back, her breaths were slight sobs, even though she didn't have the energy for tears. When they broke away, Rro'katha took a deep breath and smiled.
Thanks.
Rab pat her on the shoulder.
No problem, Brawler. Hugs are healthy. Now go on, grab your stuff and skedaddle. I'll wrap up here. Whole place is gonna go up like a bonfire soon.
Rro'katha nodded and went back to the basement. Avoiding looking towards Grayson's office, she searched around for a pack to put as many of the unbroken jars of herb into as she could. With barely enough space to even clink together, she stepped over the piles of broken shelves and headed back upstairs. She debated telling Rab that the two men down there were still alive, just unconscious, but she figured that would end with a swift thrust of steel. Taking the steps two at a time with ease, she found herself facing Rab for what would probably be the last time.
I really can't thank you enough. I don't really have anything or any way to,
Rro'katha said.
But thank you. Take care of yourself, okay?
Rab smiled and gave Rro'katha a pat on the back.
I think the ship sailed for me already. I ain't walking a path that gives me a happy ever after. Still walk it, though. So people like you and your kid brother can have one,
she said, poking Rro'katha on the shoulder.
So you make it count, eh? You take care of you and you take care of him, and you don't let anyone swindle you into doing otherwise, you hear? I will. You have my word. Not sure if that means as much as it would from Atana, but my word is about all I've had for a long time.
She nodded and headed to the back door through the kitchen, pausing momentarily before she left. Push-ups and pull-ups, usually with my brother sitting on my back, since you wanted to know.
Oh, hell yeah!
Rab enthusiastically pumped a fist in the air. Then she cringed and gripped her bandaged wound.
Oh, hell no!
She complained.
Fucking skin! Ah!
Rro'katha grinned before finally taking her leave. She did her best not to look back. Rab would have been a great friend, but they would probably never meet again. Rro'katha would never come back. Could never come back. And Rab wasn't going to leave. Still, her smile grew as she saw the streets light up with a large orange glow from behind her. It lasted all the way to the docks, where her ticket to freedom awaited.